Good morning. Welcome to the Point. We're live on Mackinac Island this morning. We've been here over the weekend for the Republican Leadership Conference. Every 2 years, Republicans come here, bringing in the party faithful, getting ready for the next general election. We know that both parties, Republicans and Democrats, are gearing up for 2020. It's a big presidential race. There's a U.S. Senate race, state House races, U.S. House races. All of that's been discussed here on the island. And of course, the big event was yesterday with the Vice President. We have video of Vice President Mike Pence visiting here. First time ever that a sitting vice president has visited this conference. There were quite a few security issues, actually had cars driving on Mackinac Island, which is an unusual thing. But the faithful here were rallied by the vice president's message that was very political. It was very much a gear up for the 2020 election cycle. And this is really going to be a battleground here in Michigan, something we'll be talking about for the next 14 months. But this morning, as our show continues, we want to talk about what's going on in Lansing right now. Here on the island, I had an opportunity to talk to both Republican leaders from the Senate and the House about what's going to happen with the budget this coming week. We know that the budget deadline is coming up very quickly, a little over a week from now. Only one budget has been passed so far. It was passed last Thursday. So first, let's hear from Speaker Lee Chatfield about what happens this week. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of things going on as you come here to the island. Obviously, every 2 years, Republicans come here to kind of get ready for the next election cycle. We'll talk a little bit about that, but first I want to talk about what's still going on in Lansing. Earlier in the week, you said you had an agreement with Minority Leader Gregg to make some changes to an education budget. And 24 hours later, you had a more than $15 billion K-12 education budget passed through the House and the Senate. How did that develop in a relatively short period, or what appeared to be a relatively short period of time?
Sure. So we had been negotiating with the governor over the past several weeks, and we had reached an impasse. And I'd been saying for a couple of weeks, Rick, that I felt like our, budget impasse that we were at was silly, and it was time to put political rhetoric aside. It was time to put partisanship aside and actually reach a budget deal. I think it's common sense. I think it's what the people expect us to do in Lansing. So after reaching an impasse with the governor, I began working in a bipartisan way with the House Democrats, and I'm very proud of the work that we did. And I think it's proof that we've been willing to negotiate all along. So I'm proud of the bipartisan work in passing the K-12 budget, and I think you'll see a continued bipartisan effort continue next Tuesday when we get back to Lansing.
Now, when you get back on Tuesday, you've got all of the other budget bills to pass out, and then they will be moving over to the governor. We don't know what she's going to do with them, but we know there are three options. She can simply sign them, and it's done. That's not going to happen. She can line item veto those budgets, and she could fundamentally change them by doing that, or she could just flat out veto them. How much longer are we going to be working on this budget from your perspective?
That's a question to ask the governor, quite frankly, at this point, because we're working in a bipartisan way. We're getting it done. And I believe now's the time for the governor to come back to the negotiating table. I've reached out to her several times, as has the majority leader, over the past couple of weeks, and expressed our interest to get back and to negotiate and to reach a consensus. She's still unwilling to do that at this point. So what she does with the budget that we send, I'm not quite certain at this point. But I will tell you this, it's going to be a budget that largely has bipartisan support, and it's showing that we're willing to put politics aside to get this budget to her desk. We've said from day one that we wouldn't be like Washington, and right now we're proving it. What we did yesterday in the House was a big step in showing we can work together, we can reach a deal. It's common sense, it's what the people expect us to do, so we're going to keep moving together, and the budget will get done, whether the governor agrees with it or not. But I'm still hopeful that she'll come back to the table and negotiate with us in good faith.
And to put a little bit of math to the bipartisan part of it, there were only 18 no votes out of 109. You're down one, so
110 still.
110. So I mean, that's not losing very many votes.
Anything you can get 91 votes for is very positive. We did have one member who was absent that day, which is why the vote tally only equaled 109. But anytime you can get 91 votes in favor of anything, you're doing something right. And I think it was a true testament to the collaboration that we saw in the House between Republicans and Democrats. Because when you're funding your schools, it's the last thing that should be politicized. And unfortunately, I think we're still seeing that out of this administration. But I'm still hopeful that we can come together and have an agreement. And perhaps the governor and I can reach deals the same way that I have with the Democrat minority leader. And I'm hopeful that we're going to continue moving forward, Rick, and we're going to get this done.
Well, one of the things as you do move forward, that you've been talking about from the beginning of the time that you took over as Speaker, is working on some social justice issues and working with both Republicans and Democrats, again, to try to make some changes in the way we look at some of the legal process that we go through. And in fact, that's where you started with the Attorney General in one of your first avails when you talked about working across the aisle like that. Has it so far? And I appreciate the governor has specific reasons and still has her promise for roads and the need to fix the roads in the state. And I know that's created a bit of an impasse, but has working with other Democrats been as easy as you thought it might be?
Yeah, quite frankly, in my opinion, it's been easier than what I originally anticipated it would be. And we've gotten a lot of things done in the House, Rick. There's some criminal justice reforms that we've passed this year that we've been debating for 20, 30 years in the House, have been unable to get them done. So we've built an excellent foundation of bipartisan cooperation in the House, and we're continuing to tackle those issues as we head into this fall, and some issues that I'm really excited about that will continue to train our workforce and ensure that people have jobs available to them, and that we're training people as they re-enter our society from the corrections department. And we need to do that. We need to help these people, and we need to make sure that we're not over-criminalizing our citizens. It's not a partisan issue. We've proven that, and we're going to continue to focus on those issues this fall.
As I've made this point several times, and I will make it again, I know you are not going to negotiate a roads deal with me on this program, but I do want to ask this question. After the budgets are done, and I assume at some point they will be done, they have to be done at some point, and you get back into negotiations about roads, the governor has made it very clear that she wants new tax revenue, not existing revenue. Is there any way in the world you get to new revenues, not the whole 45 cents or 2.5 billion, but is there new revenue possible in your chamber?
I'm open to having any conversation with this governor about what's needed to fix the roads, but I've made very clear from day one, Rick, I'm not going to have the conversation about new taxes until we ensure that every penny that's already paid in taxes at the pump is a penny that goes towards roads. I think before we go back into the pockets of our taxpayers, we need to ensure that we're already utilizing the taxes they're currently giving us. So I think it's important to differentiate. The governor doesn't want just new revenue. I want new revenue to roads too. The governor wants new taxes. And it's important that we ensure we're already spending the taxpayer dollars responsibly. We're one of 2 states in the country that charges 3 taxes at the pump, and not all 3 go to roads. That's why our roads are in the condition that they're in, and I'm going to fight to fix that.
So that crystallizes the problem to some degree. There is the question about getting more money into the roads and getting new money into the roads. And from the Speaker's perspective, getting to 56 votes in the House could be pretty difficult. We also talked with Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey. He also talked about the process, where we are with the budgets, and what it might look like as we go into next week. Senator, we're going to talk about Mackinac, what it means to be up here, and what this 2-year rotating convention means, but I want to talk about what happened this week in Lansing. I got a chance to talk with you last week on the show, and you were pretty clear. You said you're going to continue to move forward and find budgets, and that you would talk with whomever you could talk to. So apparently you and the Speaker were talking, and you passed a big chunk of the budget, or important part of it, I should say.
Very important part of the budget.
Yeah, $15 billion worth of education. How did that come about?
Working with both chambers, acknowledging some of the priorities of my governor, melding them into the plan. As you noticed, we got a pretty good support of the Dems in the House. And if you do your job and inquire as to why the Dems in the Senate, my colleagues in the Senate, didn't support, I think you'd find the reasons to be pretty interesting. I'm not going to reveal them for you, but I don't think they'd be because they were viscerally opposed to the bill. So,
well, that is intriguing. Well, I'm trapped on an island without a Democrat for 60 miles, but I will ask just those questions. This budget pushes education over $15 billion, puts about, what, $390 million more in the budget than last year, right? Do you think that sets the right priority tone for education in Michigan, given that one of the things that this budget has done, that's been going on for 20 plus years, continues to narrow the haves and the have-nots? That difference between schools is now, what, about $400 a year?
Right. Over time, we've been able to whittle that down, and previous legislatures have been contributing to that, and we're just continuing it. We put a big boost into that this time, and as you just identified, we're going to narrow that down to the point where it may even start to become imperceptible. You know, because if you start evaluating the differences of cost of living and so forth in those different areas, I'm not sure it's approaching the point in which it's not a material difference. And so we're kind of taking that argument off the table. But education has to be a high priority in Michigan, and there's also no denying that our outcomes are not acceptable either. And I also think that we're starting to discover that it's not just related to money.
Well, that too is intriguing, but before we do the whole show on education, I want to talk to you about what's going to happen this coming week, because you've got another pile of bills. They've all been passed out of all the conference committees, and they can move easily between the chambers. So on Tuesday, are we going to see the rest of the budget get passed out?
I think you'll see 15 or 16 budgets passed, whatever the balance is. They'll all be passed out on Tuesday. That's right.
And so then what? I mean, I know what the process is, but what do you think the process is going to be going forward? Because now it's all going to be in the governor's
right.
court.
Well, that's the prerogative of my governor, is to be able to review those. And, you know, she's got a lot of things that she can do. She can veto the entirety of it. She can veto individual budgets, or she can line item things within the budget. And nobody should speculate on whether that is going to happen or not. She's going to find things in the budgets that she doesn't like, and she'll line item. If not because of their not consistent with her objectives, but maybe also for political purposes, for leverage for other things. But nobody can look at this education budget or the rest of the budgets that are going to come out next week and conclude that they aren't fair, they aren't balanced, they're largely nonpartisan, and they all include at least one, if not many, of my governor's priorities. Maybe not to the level in which she wanted to fund them, but they absolutely acknowledge that they exist and they're there.
So we'll see this coming week what the governor has to say about those budgets, and we'll have more live from Mackinac Island next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point, live from Mackinac Island. This weekend has been about Republicans gathering here, getting ready for the 2020 election. But earlier in the week, I talked with U.S. Senator Gary Peters about some of the things that he's been working on from Washington, D.C. I want to start with a drone strike on a Saudi oil facility, and obviously the impact it has on oil and gasoline prices. But my bigger question for you, from your position, is how concerned are you about that type of activity leading to a real shooting war in that region that may or may not involve the United States?
Well, certainly it could. It has all of us very concerned. You know, I'm a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We watch what happens in the Middle East very, very closely. And I'm very concerned whenever you see an attack like this of that magnitude. Of course, there's already a very intense war now going on in Yemen with the Saudis and the Houthis in Yemen. What you're seeing down there in that part of the world too in Yemen is perhaps the biggest human rights and humanitarian disaster since the Second World War. That's in Saudi raids and bombing attacks there, and so now you have some counterpunches. It's still trying to be determined who may have been a part of it, but there's already a lot happening down there, and a lot of violence is occurring in that region. And whenever that kind of violence occurs, there's always the risk that it could escalate out of control, and we have to do everything we can to try to contain that as the best we can.
As a practical matter, given the volatility of that region, what is our role? What is the United States' role if there is some further escalation of violence there?
Well, hopefully try to tap it down, try to bring parties together and to stop the violence. And I think that's important that the world community needs to be engaged. This can't just be a U.S. effort. We have to bring everyone together. The Middle East is particularly important for oil supplies across the globe. We still get some oil from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, although we're more energy independent than we've been in the past. But nevertheless, the rest of the world is very dependent, and we're all interconnected as well. And that's why it's important to build very strong relations with our allies, to work with allies who have a very strong and very clear vested interest in maintaining peace in that region. And that's, of course, our traditional European allies, but also of our allies in Asia. Asian countries are particularly dependent on that part of the world. And having this sort of violence and potential cutting off of oil supplies would ripple through the entire world economy. So the entire world has to be engaged. The United States should be leaning in and taking leadership in building the kind of broad worldwide coalition to put pressure on the parties involved to basically stand down from the type of violent actions that we have seen lately.
I want to move on to another issue, and because we're recording this a little early, there could be some changes and developments, but basically I want to talk about the UAW strike that obviously impacts us here in Michigan in a big way. A lot of workers are impacted, and a lot of associated jobs. So from your perspective, how does that resolve itself, or does it?
Well, we hope it resolves itself and quickly. The sooner, the better. Strikes are never a pleasant thing to go through, regardless of what side you're on. There's certainly going to be a significant impact to the company. There are huge costs associated with every day that production doesn't move forward. There's also significant cost to the employees, to the workers who find that their paychecks are not there. There's a strike fund that pays about $250 a week. You can't live on that, so this is a real sacrifice. Folks have to come together at the table. I'm encouraged that the negotiations continue to go forward. People didn't walk away from the negotiations, and they've been going on for many hours. But the workers certainly are very committed, and I stand with the workers that they really sacrificed in helping General Motors survive during a very difficult time. They sacrificed. Since that time, the company has done very well and is very profitable, and certainly the workers should be able to share in those good times as well.
Moving on to another subject, and these next two, one involves legislation that you've introduced. But first, I want to talk about a subject that I don't know many details about, and that is a whistleblower report that was taken and now over in the House. They're trying to get to the bottom of either what the report said or how it was dealt with. What are you hearing in Washington about that report that suggests the president may have been talking with an unspecified foreign leader and said or made some promise that would have been inappropriate?
I think you summarized what we know right now. What I have heard are simply press reports that we have a whistleblower who knows the president, or at least is claiming the president made statements to a world leader that were inappropriate, and promises that were made that were inappropriate, that they thought was of urgent national security concern, and wants to bring it forward. I work with whistleblowers quite a bit as the ranking member on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Our committee is actually the chief oversight committee for the United States Senate. The way that we can have oversight over government agencies is that, in large measure, we rely on whistleblowers that will come forward and will give us information as to what is happening. And certainly we want to make sure whistleblowers know that they're protected. We want to encourage people to come forward if they have information that they believe is important and that Congress should be aware of and the American people should be aware of. We need to protect them and have them come forward. So I don't know the details beyond what I've been reading in the press as well, but it's certainly, if what is in the press is accurate, it is very troubling and raises some very serious issues. And I know just from working with whistleblowers, even though we have laws protecting whistleblowers, they know that their job could be in jeopardy. It's very difficult to get folks to come forward with some sensitive information because they're worried about their future employment. And so I can imagine a whistleblower in this case actually bringing issues related to the President of the United States himself. That's a big deal. But again, I'm going to reserve all judgment until we get more facts.
Senator, I feel like we're just going from headline to headline, but you're involved in a lot of these, and the next is one that we heard a good deal about just a couple of weeks ago, and that was the potential of government officials, cabinet members, vice president, others staying at properties owned by the president and then being reimbursed with tax dollars. Tell me about that from your perspective and the legislation that you've introduced.
Well, we've seen many reports where you have government officials going to properties owned by the president, spending very large amounts of money. We're dealing with an issue right now where Air Force crews have stopped and have gone to the president's golf resort in Scotland. It's not clear why they were making those stops. Also, they were there for many days. It's also not clear why they would go to a fairly high-priced luxury property. You know, I served in the U.S. Navy Reserve and trained overseas, and I was put up in hotels as part of that training. I will tell you, they were not luxury hotels. I I never stayed at a golf resort. Normally, the military always looks for adequate but the lowest cost accommodations for folks. And so it certainly raises issues of conflict of interest, either perceived or real. We need to know more. I've asked for the IG to investigate. In fact, I had a conversation just earlier today with the Department of Defense's IG to investigate. They're working with the IG for the Air Force to get the facts. Why have we seen a spike of aircraft going to a airport that does not have the security of a military airport, doesn't have the lower prices of fuel like a military airport? Why are they going to this airport close to the president's property, and then why are crews staying there and apparently for extended periods of time? We have a story that's saying well over $200,000 in hotel bills from the U.S. Air Force. So we need to look into that. But in the meantime, I think it's important just because of the appearances of this and the fact that we're talking about this as well. And I take very seriously to make sure we're protecting taxpayer money. Taxpayer money needs to be used the way it's intended. People in the state of Michigan, all of my folks that I'm privileged to represent from Michigan understand that taxpayer money needs to be spent wisely and appropriately and should not be used to line the pockets of a president or any high government official. And so I've introduced legislation that would prevent federal per diem money from being used and spent in a hotel owned by a high government official defined as either a president, vice president, or cabinet member. To me, this is about protecting taxpayer money and something that we have to deal with given the stories that continually come out.
Finally, Senator, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I don't want to run you long, but I do want you to weigh in on this. As the ranking member of Homeland Security and Government Affairs, you are urging a closer look at staffing at our ports of entries and at our borders. Tell me what's behind that and what you hope to achieve there. There's no question border security has to be top of mind, and that's what I think about every day as the ranking member on Homeland Security, is to keep our borders secure. To me, it's a fundamental job for the federal government to keep us safe. And right now, we have a shortage of professionals on the border, particularly Customs and Border Protection. In fact, analysis that has been done has shown that we're short by about 4,000 professionals on the border. And it's a big deal for us in Michigan. You know, we are a northern border. We are one that we have to make sure that border is secure, but we also have to make sure trade and commerce goes efficiently across that border. This is about Michigan jobs. This is about our economy. And if there is a shortage of professionals to move that trade efficiently across the border while keeping us safe, that ends up impacting the economy and it impacts Michigan jobs. So I've introduced legislation to increase the number of CBP officers that we hire, starting around 600 per year till we get that shortage. And I've also, that legislation is now passed out of my committee, goes to the full Senate floor, including another bill that has passed, which deals with agricultural inspectors. You know, we have to protect the Michigan agricultural industry, and our inspectors that are on the border are on the front line of keeping pests and other kinds of harmful agents from coming across the border that could impact our industry, as well as safety and the health of people in our country. So I'm working aggressively to strengthen our border security, both from an agricultural perspective and from a Customs and Border Protection perspective. And we'll be right back with more To the Point. We're back live on Mackinac Island, where Republicans have been kicking off their 2020 election hopes. We know that Democrats across the state are also planning for what is going to be a really battleground state for the next presidential election. And we'll be covering it all right here, To the Point.